How many leaders do you know that would want to share bad news with their team? None, right? Nobody likes to share bad news. And everyone assumes it's going to get better with time. And to some extent, I guess it will, if for no other reason than you get used to doing it. But exceptional leaders aren't willing to settle for getting used to it. You see the challenge of having those difficult conversations, and you probably had no control over the decision, let's be honest, but you are ready to meet that challenge head on. I'm sure in your Googling, you found the typical advice on how to share bad news. When you share bad news, you should be prepared. You should know what you're going to say, right? Another one might be compassionate. Supporting your team in how they feel is the most important. Or follow through, keep your commitments. If you said that you were going to communicate, continue to communicate with them. And that's all great. I wholeheartedly agree with every single one of those. And if you want the same run of the mill advice, continue on to Google and ChatGPT at will, my friend. But today, what I'm sharing with you are the three most important things about sharing bad news that you won't find in ChatGPT. First and foremost, you do need to prepare to share bad news. And most people will tell you that you need to prepare by knowing what you're going to say. And that's a fine jumping off point, but it isn't nearly enough. Yes, know what you're going to deliver in your message, know how you're actually going to say it, maybe even rehearse if you're going to tell people in person. Decide if you're going to use email, a group meeting, or share it individually, but go deeper than that. This is the time to push for clarity. Make no assumptions. Talk to your boss. Get the information before you ever share a word of whatever this bad news is with your team. Imagine the questions that your team is going to bring to you and ask about them before you talk to them. Knowing that you will share bad news with your team should have you asking lots of questions, but let's give you a few examples here. First and foremost, the simplest but most often ignored is, why are we doing this? Now, admittedly, you want to find a way to ask that question that doesn't convey some mistrust or doesn't convey some sort of disrespect, but don't shy away from it and don't let your ego keep you from it either. Know why you are making the change. Why do we need to have a layoff? Why did that person unexpectedly walk out? Why aren't we able to give any raises this year? Maybe it's a change in process. Maybe it's a change in system or in a plan that was previously communicated. Then that same question changes a little bit, right? What's the benefit of making this change? What risks are we trying to mitigate? Again, don't let your ego get in the way of this question. Your team needs to understand why a change is happening or why there is some negative thing happening throughout the company. Again, the layoffs, the lack of bonus, maybe, or the people on the team who have just left the company, whether voluntary or involuntary. Get as much information as you're able to. And then you might have already beat me to the punch on this question. How much of this information can I share with my team? For a lot of these really difficult conversations, there's going to be a certain amount that you can share and a bit more of that iceberg that needs to stay beneath the water that you aren't allowed to either share at this time or ever. And that's okay. There may be perfectly legitimate, appropriate reasons for keeping some of that information back. But what you need to know is whether or not you can share information and how far you can go with it. And I want to give you an example right here because a lot of times what I'll hear from people is, I don't bother asking the questions because I know they're not going to want me to share it. There are twofold answers to this. One, you can oftentimes share more than you think so long as you ask the question. When we leave stuff behind this cloak and dagger, when we just, don't look behind the curtain, then the assumption is that everything needs to be veiled and vague, and it's just not true. When you start digging into the details, you will find that you are able to share more than you originally thought. And the flip side of that is your team will respect that some information can't be shared. Now, not everyone, not every time, but when you are sharing what you can, and then you transparently say, I am not at liberty to give any more information, or I don't know any other information that I am able to share with the team at this time, they will more often than you think respect the fact that there are things that need to stay on a need to know basis. But finding that out and being able to speak with confidently, speak with confidence on whether or not you can share the information is important. Okay, this last one is also overlooked quite frequently because people just don't ask enough questions in these tumultuous times. Is there a clear timeline for this change or this decision? Now, I remember, post 2020, everybody had gone home to work, and then a lot of companies started bringing people back into the office. They shared, many companies shared that this was going to happen. We're going to start people back full time. We're going to transition to a hybrid model. And they missed a timeline so often. They wanted to just build awareness for people, but they didn't give them the timeline. Maybe they didn't have it. Maybe they weren't ready to share that at that point. But I would be willing to guess, and with the companies that I was working with at the time, it was a lack of just asking the question. It was oftentimes still 9 or 12 months out. And so they didn't think to share it, and nobody asked the question. Now, these types of questions are to equip you not only to share the bad news, but to support your team in a conversation. And that's the part that's really even more important because in these times more than ever, your team needs to feel like they have control. And getting involved in the conversation does just that for them. How do you involve them in these conversations? How do you get the team really integrated in that conversation? You are preparing for their questions. So invite them in to ask them. My clients do this with the communication framework. We use the communication framework in coaching to share good and bad news alike with the teams. So when the client needed to tell her IT team that their focus was going to change, she could have done it one of two ways. And actually, she started her plan with the first one, and we kind of revised it through the communication framework. So let me show you how that went. What she originally thought she would say is, our priority is now the flexibility of local meeting space, not break fix. Don't worry though, we're going to have you trained to focus on this type of work. Now, that all was true. She didn't say anything that was untrue. And those things may have even come from her asking her own questions to her boss, but she wasn't prepared to get questions. She wasn't prepared to answer questions. She really just point blank said what she needed to say and thought she'd get out. Now, this client fortunately brought this very concise remark to a coaching session, and we put it through the framework. It got a little bit longer, but not much. It came out a little bit more like this. You have been putting a ton of time and work into break fix problems. And while other teams are focused on new development, and that's actually creating more breaks for you to fix. To make the best use of everyone's time, we are focused on local meeting space. Your skills will translate so well to this new work, and you're going to get an invite to start training on it next week. I am certain there are going to be bumps in the road, but I am confident that you will bring them to me. I cannot wait to hear any thoughts or feedback you have. But to make sure that we're the most prepared that we can be, let me know what you're anticipating working about this and what you think might cause us problems in the transition. Changing this communication transformed her end result. The team was confident that they could bring questions to her, and they were empowered to be part of the solution. That empowered part is really pretty important. So let's take a look at that because that is number two, honestly. You need to share bad news with empowering empathy. Typical advice that you would see on sharing bad news is to be empathetic. Now, to use empathy is great advice until people put it into practice because for some reason we hear empathy, but we translate it into sympathy. And maybe it's because people didn't ask enough questions like we just talked about, but it could be something more. Empathy is the ability to understand and share feelings of someone else. But sympathy is feeling pity on someone for the situation that they're in. The difference is that sympathy sits in the pain, it sits in the confusion, the loss, the frustration. Empathy uses the understanding that it gets to empower people through to their next steps. So let's say that again. Sympathy sits in the emotion and empathy empowers action. Let's look at the difference in real time. Sympathy is saying, layoffs are terrifying. I appreciate you, even if they don't. A lot of supervisors would say something like this because they want their team to know that they're on their side. So, what do? They sit right down in that pain, in that pity, and get shoulder to shoulder with their people in feeling everything together. But empathy would be different. Empathy is saying, I know the possibility of a layoff feels impossible to deal with right now, but we've worked through hard things before. Let's take one step at a time. You have done some amazing things during your time here. Let's put some of that down into a list. Do you see how that's different? Empathy held space for the pain that the person was feeling. It feels impossible to go through a layoff, but you are capable of doing what feels impossible. You are able to do these hard things. Now, let's take the next step. Let's start making a list of what you've achieved so far. That is the power of empathy. It takes you through the pain to the next step. Let's do one more. Sympathy is saying, yet another change in process. I don't know what they expect from you guys. How are you going to keep on doing everything? Let's do one more. Sympathy is saying, yet another change in process. I don't know how they expect you guys to keep up with everything, but I think you're doing great. Again, that's the supervisor or the manager wanting to stay in solidarity with their team and just feel the pain with them. I can't believe someone's doing this to you. I can't believe someone's doing this to us. But empathy is different. Empathy might say, I know how hard you're working and you have met every challenge. Our top priorities remain, insert top priorities here, and they can change how we get there, but they cannot change that we always get there. Do you hear the difference in that? It still acknowledges that this is tough and that the people are working really hard, but it refocuses them on what the top priorities are and that we consistently hit our challenges. Sometimes I get pushback on this one because to empower people to the next step, you have to be more direct. And in times when you're sharing bad news, people want to make sure that they are supporting their teams. Leaders, managers, supervisors, they want to be supportive of those people who are looking to them for guidance. But being direct is how you show support. Just like in our examples, showing empathy holds space for the emotion while empowering you to the next steps. Let's use an everyday example, right? So let's say you're on the pontoon boat with all of your friends, and suddenly you watch your sunglasses fall off the side of the boat. Now, everybody on the boat can watch those sunglasses sink and say, oh no. And sympathy might come alongside you and go, oh, that sucks. I can't believe they fell off. Those were your favorite sunglasses. We probably shouldn't have been going fast through those waves, right? It's not helpful. It just sits there in that pain with you, however painful losing your sunglasses can be. But looking at empathy through that, you might still get that collective, oh no, as your favorite shades are sinking to the bottom of the lake. But that person might then say, do you want us to drop anchor? We can stop right here. A couple people will jump in and see if we can catch them. Or once we get back to land, I will take you to the nearest gas station and we will get you new pairs of shades this afternoon. Which one would you feel better with? Not with someone sitting with their arm around you as you watch your sunglasses float down, but someone who can help you see the next step and that we can actually find a solution to anything, least of all, something as basic as losing your sunglasses. And similar to our sunglasses is that layoff example. I know it's two different ends of the spectrum, but simply looking at a potential downsizing and reassuring the team that you appreciate their work has the ability to make them feel worse. That's putting your arm around them and just saying, ah, this is terrible. They don't need you to watch with them as their hope sinks down like those sunglasses did. They need you to be direct, to bring them to a decision of what to do next. Being direct takes back that power. You and your team, you're no longer the victim in that circumstance. You're able to make the most of any difficult situation. And really, it is these two ends of the spectrum, the sunglasses level bad news and the layoff level bad news, is where this third piece of advice actually comes into play. And that is being consistent when you share bad news. Now, I don't just mean the run of the mill, make sure you respond when you say you're going to, make sure you come to the meeting to share an update when you say that you're going to. I'm talking consistency from every level of bad news so that people don't have the questions, the spiraling rumor mill thoughts about what they're missing out on because of how you're handling it. They know exactly what to expect from you. Now, there are two things you need to be able to create that consistency with your team. Because again, this is next level, you guys. This is not just your run of the mill consistency because you need to follow through on what you said. This is for exceptional leaders who want to create consistency. And that means that they need to be consistently authentic and structured for people every time there is bad news to share. So you're going to need two things. And the first is to be able to be authentic. And that's understanding your own talents and your strengths. This means that you know what you do best and you lean into that when times get hard. So, in coaching, we identify your natural talents in the first 2 to 3 weeks of coaching, which means that you can leverage your unique cocktail of strengths confidently so that your team never has to question that you are giving them the whole story. Again, this is about building consistency to show them that they can trust you regardless of what level of bad news you're sharing. One client who was a complete visionary for his business had to break the news to his technicians that they wouldn't be off double shifts for at least 2 more months. He leaned into that futuristic talent of his and painted the picture of what the extra hours would do for the company, for their valued customers, and to all of his guys' bank accounts. You could vividly share that vision just like he did. And every single one of them saw themselves as part of the vision because it was in his nature to think that way. He could tie the vision to each and every sacrifice and benefit that the company and his employees were going through. The other half of building consistency and sharing bad news is a framework. And look, I get it. Having a structure to communicate with seems to, counter utilizing your talents. But that's the very reason you need it. Using a communication framework, just like we talked about before, with your natural talents and strengths, gives you this balanced, repeatable process. Your team will know what to expect from you every step of the way. And there's comfort in knowing what to expect, even in a difficult time, or especially in a difficult time, both for you and for your team, to be honest. When you utilize a framework, you get consistency knowing what you're going to say and when, even when the information is difficult to share. You won't revert back into those sympathetic tendencies. You won't revert back into only sharing bits of knowledge. And your team gets to focus on digesting all of that information rather than trying to guess where you're going next because they've seen it all before and they trust what you're sharing with them. Okay, so let's use one example to just put this all together. I know I share a lot of client examples, but this one is actually from my history of leading a team and some really terrible news that I had to share. So, in that moment, I had just returned from maternity leave. I was getting my feet back underneath me. I had been leading a team of about 20 people when I left, and we were adding another 30 people to my oversight. And prior to having the baby, I was leading work with a business consultant for our department. I was creating an onboarding process that was going to support the entire department of 200. And I was planning on, how I was going to more than double the team as soon as I came back to the office. In that first month that I was back, the head of our department left the company unexpectedly. There were a ton of unanswered questions. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of instability because employees there just hadn't gone through something like that before. We didn't just have people leaving the company just at a drop of a hat like that. So at that moment, I knew there was a lot of work to do, but at the same time, I could breathe easily because I had already built this foundation. I already knew how to share bad news with my team. So we had a meeting with an executive officer, and most people spent that meeting just like playing with their hands, honestly, staring down at the table and jiggling their knee, like anything to just get through it. Not me, though. I had questions. I wanted to find out what the facts were around that person leaving the company. I wanted to find out how much I could share. I wanted to know if we were planning to promote someone or if we were hiring from outside and what we expected to be a timeline to bring in a new executive if they weren't going to be promoted from within. My team knew that I was transparent, right? So they expected me and they could trust in me that I was going to share every bit of information that I could. And I didn't just meet with the leaders with something that swift, a cut that quick. I wanted to talk to everybody at once so there wouldn't be time for any rumor mills. So I brought all 50 of them into a room and we stood in a circle where we could all see each other face to face. Again, this was a foundation that I had already been laying. That's how we did our huddles every single time we met. I shared everything that I could. I had my notebook in hand as I talked. Everyone else just came as they were. I started by saying, one of the things that I was most proud of for that team was their ability to do whatever they needed to do under pressure. And that was 100% genuine. Now we were going to need to rely on that more than ever because we didn't have this person at the top. I told them everything that I knew and how we would be able to move forward. And then, notebook and pen in hand, I asked them what other questions they had. Now, I had just learned this information 5 minutes before the meeting got called, but I could bring their questions to somebody else to get answers. I could try to answer the questions or correct anything that they had maybe misunderstood about what I shared. It was just like our weekly huddles, only bigger. So people could have the confidence that we were going to continue to handle this just like we always did. And just like they bring their big projects back to huddle every week to give us updates on, this is now my project, and I will bring updates to them at every single huddle. That day, a lot of other teams lost productivity. And I honestly don't blame them. People milled around the office and just gossiped for a good portion of the day. They ignored their phones or turned them off so that they weren't getting interrupted by customers. But in the following week's huddle, the huddle that was already preset with my team, every single one of my teams were on track. And it's not because they weren't affected by the news. Everyone in the department was shocked and worried, and my team was not different. But my team had had a consistent, empowered approach to all of their problems. And this was just the same structure on a bigger scale. This was just going from sunglasses to, I mean, it wasn't a layoff, but that level of pain. We could weather the small storms, and we had already practiced making it through them. We could weather this storm as well. I would imagine that you want that same preparation. You would want to have that same impact for your team to know that these small waves and big ones are not going to throw you off course. So, if that is something that you want, click the link below and let's talk about this in coaching. Let's leverage your strengths, the structures, and see what your communication can do for you. All right. I hope that that was helpful. If you have a friend who is needing to share some difficult conversations or difficult information with their team, by all means, share this with them. And I will see you in the next one.